Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Johns Hopkins Performing Arts and Sports Grand Rounds. We're very excited to get these back up and running. We were away for a little bit over the summer, and now this is our first one of this year's series. So we're very fortunate to have Dan Benardot with us today, and he is going to be talking about applying sports nutrition research for the performing artists. A little bit about his background. So he's a professor of practice in the Center for the Study of Human Health at Emory University. Following his retirement as tenured full professor of nutrition and full professor of kinesiology and health at Georgia State University, where he currently holds rank of professor emeritus. He received a PhD in human nutrition and human service studies from Cornell University and an honorary doctorate from Marywood University for his work in sports nutrition. He is also a fellow of the American College of Sports Medicine and is a registered dietitian nutritionist. From 2002 to 2017, he served as a founder and director of the Laboratory for Elite Athlete Performance at GSU. He has written several books and book chapters on sports nutrition and numerous scientific referred to publications that focus on within-day energy balance and related issues in competitive athletes. His most recent book was published on the Advanced Sports Nutrition, and another is American College of Sports Medicine's Nutrition for Exercise Science. In 1993, he received the American Dietetic Association of Sports and Cardiovascular Nutrition and Achievement Award. In 1995, he was initiated into the alumni honor roll for the State University System of New York. And then in 1996, USA Gymnastics presented him with the Outstanding Educator Award following the team's Olympic gold medal at the Atlanta Olympic Games. He also has served as a nutritionist for several other US Olympic teams, including USA Track and Field and USA Figure Skating. And we're really excited for him today to talk with us about applying nutrition to performing arts. So Dan, feel free to take it away.
Thank you so much for that introduction. That was very nice. Good morning, everyone, and I look forward to talking with you about this topic. Just so you know, I'm a cellist, and I know a lot of musicians and fellow artists. And one of the things that I've learned is that there's an enormous amount of myth related to nutrition in that population. And one of my goals is to try to break through some of those myths, which are so prevalent there. So let's get started. So one of the reasons why I like sports nutrition is because it pushes the system. And you kind of see what breaks down first. And then you come to realize that actually it may take a little bit longer, but those are the things that break down first in just about everyone. And so there's a lot of application for the general public and for performing artists on what we've learned in sports nutrition. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but car companies donate their cars to race in stock car races. They're non-modified. And the reason they do it is to see what breaks down first so that they can keep the longevity of a car when it gets pushed to the limit. So it's kind of like what happens with sports nutrition. And there is a lot of myth, as I mentioned, in nutrition. I mean, if you look at this, Hippocrates emphasized the importance of nutrition to improve performance in the Olympic Games, all very good. But he said, if you want to improve sore muscles, get drunk once or twice. I don't know if it improves the sore muscles or you just don't realize that you have sore muscles. And for weight loss, eat more meat. And there were controversy even back then. Pythagoras' advice to athletes was for greater physical sharpness, eat less meat and more fresh vegetables. The beauty of what we have now is we actually have science working on our side. And so we can take some of this science and apply it to really understand the best ways to proceed to help people not only perform well, but also have a longer and more successful and more injury-free career, not just in sports, but in the performing arts and just also a general work person. We can take this information and apply it. One of the things we know is that when you're physically active, you get an increased rate of energy expenditure. And because we're only about 30% efficient at converting metabolized fuel to muscle movement, we're heat creators. About 70% of the energy that we burn creates heat. So we have to dissipate that heat. We can't acquire it. So there's a lot of body fluid loss associated with that as well. And, if you look at surveys, you find something very interesting. Physically active people don't eat enough to satisfy their energy needs, and they don't drink enough to satisfy their fluid needs. And what makes it even more interesting is that they tend to supply the needed energy and fluids after they needed them. It's a little bit like telling your car, take me to California. I promise you, I'll give you all the fuel you needed for the trip once we get there. You can't do that with your car. And it turns out that really nasty things happen if you do that with your body as well. So lots of questions. What fuels are best? When should the fuel be provided? What form should the fuel be in? What is the best way to replace the fluids? What compounds should the fluids contain to sustain performance? I mean, it's fascinating because if you look at even very high level and successful athletes, they wait to get thirsty before they drink. Well, you've already lost 1.5 liters of water if you wait for that to occur. So if you continue to exercise, you're never going to get yourself back up to a good state where your sweat rate can actually dissipate the heat that you're acquiring as a result of the physical activity which is going on. So lots of errors. We have to learn how to drink as you go. And I think performing artists need to learn how to do that as well, to kind of keep their hydration state normal. And that's a key here, I think, is learning how to sustain normalcy rather than to recover from abnormalcy. And we know that there's a huge interaction between physical activity and nutrition. It changes energy requirements, it changes energy substrate requirements, it alters vitamin requirements, it alters mineral requirements, it alters fluid requirements. A lot of people think you have to take supplements in order to satisfy many of these requirements, but you don't, right? Far too often, the recommendation for physical activity to reduce disease risk happens without considering how additional activity may influence energy and nutrient needs. It's very important. You can't just tell somebody, be more active. You have to ask, what are the implications of that additional activity on nutritional and fluid needs? And huge number of problems related to physical activity. And these are similar to the eating issues observed in the general public. So, lack of access to people who know about nutrition, busy lifestyles, making it very difficult to obtain appropriate foods. What's kind of interesting, when I talk to a performing artist and I ask them, when's your next rehearsal? They know. But when I say, okay, when's the next time you're going to eat? They'll go, oh, I'm not sure. I'll grab something. And that's a big mistake. They have to think of these two things as dynamically linked. They have to figure out how they can get what they need in real time and plan for it and have it available so that they can do it in real time. And if you do that, good things happen, right? And this is hugely important to consider. The commonly offered advice of eat less and exercise more for those people who are concerned about weight fails, always fails. And I'll show you some of the reasons why that fails. So let's just talk about some of the misperceptions which are out there, which affect athletes, but also affect performing artists and affect the general public. One is that weight is an indicator of health and well-being. In fact, weight is the wrong measure for virtually everything that it's commonly used for. It's not about weight. It's what constitutes weight. That's really important. It's all about fat mass versus fat-free mass. And if you just take weight, you don't really know what's going on. So when you look at somebody and say, oh, you've lost some weight, what you really would like to say to them is, oh, you've lost some fat. But they don't know if that's what's happened. I mean, what if they've lost muscle as a result of the weight that they have lost? That's not something that would be considered desirable at all. So what constitutes weight ends up being extraordinarily important, not just for athletes, not just for performing artists, but for the general public as well. And, you know, the nice thing is we have equipment now, which is relatively inexpensive, to get reasonably good predictions and estimates of what body fat is there and what muscle mass is there and what bone density is there, to actually measure what changes are occurring. So it's really important that we help athletes and performing artists do two things. We have to stop doing things that lower metabolic mass, and we have to stop doing things that increase fat mass. But a lot of what we do is a problem. So also, we have to be very careful about some of the terms, I think, which are being used. The weight-related term obesity and overweight are used interchangeably, and that's wrong. By definition, obesity means having too much body fat. Overweight means weighing more than the standard weight to height ratio, or BMI. So, you know, weight can come from lean mass. Well, most of us would consider that to be good. Bone mass, most of us would consider that to be good. Fat mass, generally not great. And body water, well, lean mass is 60% water typically, so you would expect that to go up as well if lean mass is going up. You know, what's kind of interesting is the person on the lower right, that very muscular image that you're looking at, if you look at BMI standards, that person is considered obese because they're carrying so much weight for their height, but it's muscle weight. They're not obese. They're not obese, okay? Body mass index is commonly used for assessments for individuals. It was never intended to be used for individual assessment. Body mass index is a population assessment for a prediction of obesity prevalence. It's not intended to be used for individuals, but it is all the time. And it creates false positives where a lean, large, athletic person may have an obese profile because their BMI is greater than 30, but has a low body fat. So by definition, they are not obese. It can also create false negatives. A thin, small person may not have an obese profile, BMI of around 20, but has a high body fat level and low lean, so is obese. There's a difference between thinness and leanness, and we have to keep that in mind. And this is, I think, very important because in schools, they're assessing kids in schools in their annual physical using BMIs. And BMI has a high specificity but low sensitivity to detect excess adiposity, and it fails to identify over a quarter of children with excess body fat percent. And when you can't nip this in the bud when somebody is young, then you almost guarantee that they're going to have a lifetime of higher body fat levels. So it's something I think we have to be cognizant of and be a little bit concerned of. Here's another misperception. Only eating too much will make you fat. Well, you know, it's kind of interesting because humans are amazingly effective fat manufacturing machines. You eat too much food, you make fat. You eat too little food, you lose muscle, and you make fat. It's very interesting. And, you know, if you look at studies which have looked at dieting and what happens, what happens is you get a faster rate of fat recovery relative to fat-free mass recovery once adaptive thermogenesis kicks in. So the person has adapted to the inadequate energy intake which they're consuming. And the result is you get high rates of additional dieting, more severe dieting, weight loss recidivism, and you get increased risk for eating disorders, you get low bone mineral density, a lot of problems which can impact the life of a performing artist, a non-performing artist, an athlete, pretty much anyone. Low-calorie diets are doomed to fail. I mean, if you look at this study published in JAMA, it's fascinating. I mean, they all basically, they lose weight initially, but then adaptive thermogenesis kicks in, and you may have lowered your caloric intake by 30%, but you become 40% more efficient. So your weight goes back up, but what constitutes your new weight is more fat and less muscle, because the body catabolizes in a very logical way, catabolizes the tissue that needs energy. It's trying to survive. So you're not going to give me enough energy, that I'll lower my need for energy by lowering metabolic mass, muscle mass. But then it lowers too much, and then you go back up. And one of the things I want you to notice here is very important, that most studies assessing diet strategies for weight typically only assess the subjects for 1 to 2 months. Look at how long it takes before adaptive thermogenesis kicks in, right? It can take 6 months before all of a sudden weight starts going back up because the person has adapted. So we have to have much longer studies to assess some of these things, but we already know that inadequate caloric intake creates a problem. And then you get weight cycling, which creates cardiovascular and renal disease risks because of the fluctuations in cardiac load, glomerular filtration issues, vascular injury. So it's a problem. And the author of this, Montani, had a really wonderful quote. He said, "It may not even be prudent to recommend that overweight or obese adults should try to lose weight, as matters typically get worse because of the strategies that they're following to get themselves down to what they want." And remember, just measuring weight is problematic. Here's another issue. The energy cost of exercise is always the same. Well, it's not. Humans are always finding ways to become more energy efficient. Exercise more, and we eventually find a way to burn less energy to do this exercise, because energy is metabolically treated as precious, right? So if you get somebody to increase weightlifting, right, so that their muscle goes up, their muscle will increase to make it easier to lift that weight, right? So at rest, the resting metabolic rate will be a little bit higher, but doing that activity, the amount of calories it takes to lift the weights actually goes down dramatically. That's why the body increases the muscle, to make it easier and less calorically costly to move those weights which are being moved, right? So the problem is a lot of formulas for predicting the cost of energy expenditure is based on resting energy expenditure and the multiples of that, and it can be a little bit misleading, right? So just remember that chronic training improves mitochondrial content and function, and we find a way to use less energy doing the same activity. And we have to be very careful about how we calculate energy utilization using the standard means, because they may be a little bit misleading, because they're based on the amount of musculature, metabolic mass that the person actually has. That is, they're based on lean mass. So it's a kind of a source of error. Focusing on perfect foods somehow will, make things better. We have to be cautious about this. People who continuously eat the same few foods because they believe these foods are healthy are at risk of malnutrition. There is no perfect food. There is no perfect food. I was talking to a group of ballet dancers not too long ago, and I asked them what they had for breakfast this morning. And then I asked them what they had for breakfast the day before. And I asked them what they had for breakfast the day before that. And I asked them what they had for breakfast today. It was all the same. They keep eating a monotonous diet, which means that they're limiting exposure to the nutrients that they may need, right? Because there's no perfect food. I mean, if somebody just eats yogurt all the time, you're going to get iron deficiency anemia pretty fast, because it's a pretty terrible source of iron, as an example, right? Look at this table, right? Different colors, different nutrients, right? Different colors, different nutrients. So no single food can supply all of the nutrients and phytonutrients associated with good health. Only variety works. You get a better assurance of exposing tissues to all nutrients, and you get a better assurance of avoiding excess tissue exposure to any nutrient or food substance that may be in that food. I mean, you don't know what pesticide was used with the oats that you ate this morning and yesterday morning and the morning before that, and the morning before that, and so on, right? And if you have a little bit of it, your body can probably tolerate it very nicely. But chronic exposure may create a problem, and we have to be cautious of that, right? Another issue is this: high sugar intake will make you fat, right? I mean, it's amazing how many times I suggest to an athlete that they learn how to drink a sports beverage, and they say, well, doesn't it have sugar? That'll make me fat. Really? Because if you don't drink it, if you're just drinking water and you get low blood sugar, guess what you're breaking down to normalize your blood sugar so that you can make sure your central nervous system works? You're breaking down muscle. And so your relative body fat level actually goes up when you do that, right? And we also have to imagine that there are many ways to increase insulin and make more fat besides just sugar. So just the focus on sugar is very misleading, all right? So if you get hungry, so as an example, if you wait too long between meals to eat, and you eat in a low blood sugar state, you're going to be hyperinsulinemic. It doesn't matter what you eat. It does not matter what you eat. If you eat a large meal, insulin is produced exponentially to the caloric load of the meal that you eat. You're going to make a lot more fat out of that meal than you would if you spread it out over time and didn't present the system with so much food all at once. So yes, sugar is conditionally bad, but it's not the only thing. We have to be cautious about all of the different ways that can actually encourage more fat manufacture. And we need to spend a little bit more time on that. You'd be hard-pressed to find anything better to give a hardworking athlete than a sugar-containing beverage, like a sports beverage, during physical activity. When they're not physically active, having a liquid sugar beverage is the worst imaginable thing that you could do. However, it's also a bad thing to wait too long to have something to keep blood sugar normal. Most people don't realize that blood sugar stays normal doing normal daily activity for only 3 hours. You eat, blood sugar reaches its peak 1 hour after you eat, and 2 hours after that, it's back to pre-meal levels. You need to have a snack just to keep blood sugar normal. People are afraid because they say, oh, if I have a snack, I'll get fat. No, it's just the opposite. And I'm going to show you some interesting data here in a second. So think about this. Total sugar intake the same. This person never has more than 40 grams of sugar at one time. This person has 90 grams at one time. They're not the same, right? The greater amount of simple sugar, the exponentially greater amount of insulin, which is produced to deal with it. So you're putting even extra amounts of sugar into the cell. Cells don't know what to do with it, and they convert it to fat, right? And think about hyperinsulinemia. If you have delayed meals, large meals, a 3-meal-a-day pattern with no snacks, meals with refined foods, no snacking between meals, all of those are hyperinsulinemic events when you do that. So please, we have to think about how we can normalize the response to the foods that we're eating. And delayed eating, you've all heard of the Mediterranean diet, I'm sure, and they keep talking about why it's so good for you because it's high in fish, high in fresh fruits, fresh vegetables. What they don't tell you is that if you're on the Mediterranean diet, you're eating 7 or 8 times a day. You have breakfast, you have a mid-morning snack, you have lunch, you have an afternoon snack, you have dinner, you have your first dinner, you have your second dinner, you have a snack before you go to bed. They distribute the food in small amounts, but they assure that blood sugar never gets too low. It's a very important thing to consider. Supplements are an effective way of improving nutritional status. Well, we have to be careful because most supplements provide at least the recommended dietary allowance in a single dose, often much more than the recommended dietary allowance in a single dose, right? And the human system doesn't like to have it that way. We prefer to just parse it out in smaller amounts. We have to think about this. More than enough is not better than enough, really. I mean, there are a lot of supplement issues, right? So there's a study that they did in the Maui Marathon where they took half the runners, they gave them a placebo, the other half they gave them 800 international units of vitamin E supplements because it's an antioxidant. And they assumed that it would limit the amount of reactive oxygen species and the effect that the negative effect that might have on muscles, reduce muscle soreness. Guess what? What they found is that those who were taking the vitamin E supplements that promoted lipid peroxidation and inflammation during exercise. The people who took the placebo actually did better. Why? Because if you're taking a supplement, it prevents tissue adaptation to what you're doing. And if you're just eating normally, provide enough, and you increase your exercise level, your physical activity, then the cells can adapt to that and make their own antioxidants, keep it around, make sure that they need a little bit more vitamin E in the cell membrane. So the big differences, a lot of people know that leucine is a muscle protein synthesis stimulator, and whey protein is a very excellent source of leucine. What they don't know is that, yes, if you have a little bit of leucine, about 100 calories worth in whey protein, for instance, very good things happen. But a lot of people think if a little bit is good, more must be better. No, because if you have 2 cups of whey protein isolate instead of that 1, then you actually down-regulate muscle protein synthesis. The cells reject the leucine, so they inhibit the uptake of all the things that would be necessary to make sure that the cells can recover and repair. So lots of issues there. There are a lot of banned substances that are not listed on the label, especially for supplements that are intended for physically active people. And these are banned. I mean, not so much of a problem with performing artists, but if an athlete has a urine test and these banned substances show up in the urine, they're out, right? And the problem is that the advertising is taking a hold because most young athletes, physically active people, and there's an article I'll give you a reference to that I recently wrote and published on performing artists believe that supplements are necessary for good health. They're not. You just have to learn how to eat, right? And there's some very good position papers out there, very clear, that say athletes should meet their nutritional requirements by eating food at the right times and the right amounts, period. Because there are all kinds of problems that happen when they become over-reliant on supplements, right? So this beautiful paper by Mon et al., vitamin and mineral supplements should only be used when a food-based solution is not available. And then there are potential costs associated with all dietary supplements, including the risk of a positive doping result. Really, we really need to think about this very carefully. People take all kinds of stuff, but think about how much you're presenting to the cells at one time. And think about this. This is a study looking at mortality rate in older women. This is part of a much larger study. It's the Iowa Women's Health Study. And periodically, they'll review different things that the women in the study are doing. And one of the things they looked at, and this was published in 2011, was are there different mortality risks in women who are taking multivitamins? And what they found, a 2.4% increased mortality risk for the women who were taking multivitamins, 4.1% increased mortality risk for the women who were taking vitamin B6, 5.9% increased mortality risk when they were taking folic acid. The only thing that decreased risk was calcium intake. But we're constantly saying, well, take a supplement. Look, if there's no known biological need, in other words, if you don't see that somebody actually does have iron deficiency anemia, then you got to be very careful about just recommending broad spectrum vitamins, because the outcome could be the opposite of what you're actually looking for. Plus, there's some pretty good studies to show that, if somebody's got iron deficiency anemia, maybe it's not so good to take a single dose of iron every single day. You actually recover faster if you take that same dose every third or fourth day, because it doesn't interfere with the absorption of the other bivalent minerals. So now you don't get a deficiency of zinc, calcium, magnesium, iron. They're all absorbed in the same place. If you take a high daily dose of one, you're going to interfere with the absorption of the others and create issues because of a deficiency of those others. So something to consider. So recent studies on folic acid, right? I mean, it's kind of interesting. If you have the recommended dietary allowance of folic acid spread out over the course of a day, so let's say, okay, the recommended dietary allowance is 400 micrograms per day. If you have 100 micrograms 4 times a day, you decrease cancer risk. If you have the same amount in a single dose, you increase cancer risk, right? Okay, because guess what? The cells can't deal with it all, but cancer cells love it. They're hypermetabolic cells. Folic acid is involved in cell growth and development. Hyperactive cells take up the excess and you increase cancer risk. Okay, so we have to be very cautious, I think, about what happens with some of these things, right? So here's a very simple way to think about it, right? That's the cellular capacity for nutrients. That's the daily requirement. You can't put the daily requirement into the cells all at once. And this is the typical supplemental dose. Where in the world is that supposed to go, right? So let's think about this a little bit clearly. Unless there's a known biologically assessed nutrient deficiency, taking a pharmacological approach to nutrition doesn't work very well. Eat good food and plan for it. That's the best way to go, right? There are a lot of energy balance beliefs that are questioned. You used to think, 3,500 calories equals 1 pound of weight. So if I lower my food intake by 500 calories, in a week, I'll have a 3,500 calorie deficit. I will have lost 1 pound. No, that doesn't work, right? I mean, even the National Institutes of Health now finally admits that doesn't work. And they have all kinds of examples of the actual weight loss that might occur. And part of the problem is that it doesn't take into account the adaptive mechanisms that humans have for reduced energy intake. One of the big problems is the macroeconomic view of energy intake that people have, right? Have you heard of calories in, calories out? Nod your head if you've heard of that, right? Right? Forget it. I mean, calories in, calories out is based on 24-hour units, right? So it basically says if you burn 2,000 calories over the course of a day and you eat 2,500 calories over the course of a day, you'll gain weight because you'll store the extra 500 calories. It would put you in a positive energy balance. And if you have a negative energy balance, right, you lose weight, right? So if you burn 2,500 calories, right, and you eat 2,000 calories, then you have to take 500 calories from your body, right? Well, we now know that this does not work. The human system is very complex when it comes to energy balance, and energy in and energy out are affected by all kinds of things. And I'm going to show you 2 really important things here. One is leptin and one is ghrelin, right? So these 2 have opposite effects, right? So leptin lowers food intake, it increases energy expenditure, it increases fat catabolism, it lowers plasma glucose, and it lowers body weight. Ghrelin, which is the appetite stimulating hormone, has exactly the opposite effect. So you would think with those 2 things working, you'd be perfect all the time, right? But we have now discovered that there are some things that you do that throw the leptin and ghrelin system totally off, right? And one of them is within day energy balance, right? So decreased meal frequency correlates with greater daily energy consumption. Did you hear me? When I tell people to have a snack, they say, oh, if I have a snack, I'll get fat, I'll eat too much. No, it's just the opposite. That is, people who eat more often during the day have lower total energy intakes, not less, lower, right? Possibly this is from an upregulation of appetite, likely, and I'll show you why, and also a tendency toward increased fat intake because you're out of control, hungry, and you just will eat anything in front of you. Increased energy intake is not matched with higher activity, so it gives you higher body fat. And this is the problem. If you eat when you're hungry because of decreased meal frequency, right, insulin release it typically suppresses ghrelin, which is the appetite stimulating hormone. And ghrelin, when it's suppressed, suppresses appetite, right? But an eating pattern that results in low blood sugar, that is a long period of time between eating opportunities, results in hyperinsulinemia. And that doesn't disrupt ghrelin. So your appetite stays high, right? So people who allow themselves to get hungry, ghrelin stays elevated, so you eat more than you would have because it doesn't shut off when you've eaten enough, right? If you eat when you're in a normal blood sugar state, the insulin ghrelin system works very well and there's no issue there. So here's another way to think about it, right? The traditional view is you just look at this endpoint, this 24 hours at the end of a day, right? But actually people have energy balance variations over the course of a day, right? So you eat breakfast, you put some calories in the bank, you have an energy surplus. You work it off, you go into a negative energy balance, then you have lunch. And you work it off, you have a little snack, and you work it off, and you have the mother of all dinners, and you go into a surplus, and then you end the day in a perfect energy balance state. But one of the things that we have found is that you're only in energy balance, perfect energy balance, just by accident a few times over the course of a day. What really matters is how much time did you spend in an energy balance deficit? How much time did you spend in an energy balance surplus? How big was the surplus? How big was the deficit? And when you start looking at those issues, it starts to answer a lot of the fitness questions that performing artists and athletes and just the general public are concerned with. Okay, so here are 3 eating patterns. Okay. Eating pattern, they're all in perfect energy balance. So if we just did a 24-hour energy in, energy out, they would all look perfect, right? But in this one, somebody's eating 6 times a day. You eat, you work it off, you eat, you work it off, you eat, you work it off 6 times. This is a 3-meal-a-day pattern, which is what a lot of people strive for here. Does it make sense to you that if you're eating 3 times a day instead of 6 times a day, you have to eat more each time you eat in order to satisfy your energy requirement to go into an energy balanced state? And this is what a lot of physically active people do. They eat a little bit, they work it out. They eat a little bit, they exercise, they exercise, they exercise, they exercise, they exercise, they have some snacks, and then they have a big dinner, right? And one of the things that we now know is that if the energy surplus is too high, if the energy balance surplus is too high, and the energy balance deficit is too low, really bad things happen. This is a study we published in 2000 in Medicine and Science and Sports and Exercise. This is the top artistic gymnasts in the United States, the top rhythmic gymnasts in the United States, the top middle distance runners in the United States, and the top long distance runners in the United States. There are 24 bars in each group. Each bar represents the energy balance for that hour of the day. So I want you to focus on bar 17 of group 2. I'm just kidding, but it was nice that I saw you looking. Okay, so, but one of the things I want you to notice, this 0 is perfect energy balance, where your body has been provided exactly the amount of energy that it has expended at that moment in the day, all right? And one of the things we found is that the groups that had the biggest energy balance deficits had the highest body fat level. So this is the biggest deficit, rhythmic gymnast, highest body fat level. Second biggest deficit, second highest body fat level. We thought the long distance runners would have the lowest body fat level, but no, look, they deviating more from perfect energy balance, right? than the middle distance runners. The middle distance, we didn't tell them how to eat. We just assessed how they were eating. They figured out how to eat so that they could satisfy their energy balance over the course of a day. And one of the things I want you to look at is, look, they all ended the day within 100 calories of their predicted requirement. So they were all eating what they needed to eat, but it was how they ate, how they took in the food that they took in. That was interesting. And we did a secondary analysis to look at this statistically to say, what's your statistical risk of having a higher body fat level if you go outside a certain range? And we found if you could stay plus or minus about 400 calories, then you would be in a good energy balance state, right? And body fat level, statistically speaking, you would not be at higher risk of having higher body fat levels. We did a subsequent study on female athletes, my colleagues from the University of Copenhagen, and we basically found that the female athletes who experienced an energy balance deficit of minus 300 calories had significantly higher cortisol, significantly lower estrogen, even when they were in a 24-hour energy balance state. And we did the same thing with male athletes, significantly higher cortisol, stress hormone, which is catabolic to lean tissue, by the way, and significantly lower testosterone to cortisol ratio. Very difficult to build musculature in that state, even when they're in a 24-hour energy balance state. We have to figure out how we can get away from this 3-meal-a-day craziness, which, by the way, has nothing to do with human physiology. 3 meals a day was created by the Industrial Revolution, where the industrialists said, have breakfast before you go to work, we'll give you a half an hour break for lunch, and have dinner when you go home. It has nothing to do with the way we should eat, but somehow we're looking at it as if it's perfect. The International Olympic Committee now actually has a consensus statement called Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport, which I just described to you. That is, you may be eating enough, but if you exercise in a point where you're in a low energy balance state, you can get all kinds of problems, and there are disease risk problems and performance issue problems. This has relevancy for everyone, performing artists, athletes, general public, everyone. Big issues that can occur if you don't stay in a good energy balance state. We did a study on national team figure skaters, and we found that the skaters who ended up with a lot of time in an energy balance state below minus 400 calories had lower bone mineral density, right? The skaters who stayed in a good energy balance state over the course of a day, no problem with their bone mineral density. You know, it was fascinating, right? And we didn't see any association whatsoever with 24-hour energy balance, right? It wasn't there, right? And we didn't see an association either with the distribution of carbohydrate, protein, and fat, right? It was energy balance that was the issue. We did a study on collegiate athletes where for 2 weeks we gave them 250 calorie energy bar, 3 a day, or a non-caloric placebo that had the same flavor as the energy bar. So one instruction: have an energy bar after breakfast and before lunch, another one after lunch and before dinner, another one after dinner and before you go to bed. The other group, randomly selected, we said the same thing. Take one of these packets, put it in the bottle, shake it up, drink it after breakfast and before lunch, after lunch and before dinner, and another one after dinner and before you go to bed. And they thought that we were studying the difference between liquid and solid calories, but the liquid was non-caloric. It was a placebo, right? The solid was 250 calories. This is actually a Gatorade energy bar that Gatorade repackaged for us so that people couldn't see what it was, but they had the same flavor. This is orange flavored and this is orange flavored. So we measured all of these things. We measured them at baseline, 1 week later, 2 weeks later, and then we took them off the product or the placebo and we measured them again 6 weeks later. Well, what we found after 2 weeks was a significantly lower body fat percent, higher trend in insulin-like glucose factor 1, which is very important for increasing musculature. The profile of mood states, they felt more vigorous. significantly better power and endurance on a double Wingate test of anaerobic power and endurance. And interestingly enough, the group that had the bars, no change in total caloric intake, none, because they weren't as hungry. And I just explained to you, the ghrelin effect that you have if you keep blood sugar normal. Well, what was interesting, we took it away from them. I had athletes coming back to my lab saying, I know what you gave us was illegal, but could I have some more, please? Right? I mean, they didn't know what it was, but they knew that they were feeling better. So after 6 weeks, we took it away, right? And we measured them after 6 weeks, and they reverted right back to their baseline values. Why? Because people do what everybody around them is doing. And they didn't know that this was a commercially available bar. They literally did think that there was something in there that was, so they didn't know what to buy, to make them feel better. So it was kind of interesting, what happened. This is very important to consider from a protein standpoint. This is an energy balance line of a physically active person. Okay. Energy balance. And you can see that at the end of the day, after exercise, they went into a severe, almost a 1,000 calorie energy balance deficit, right? Okay. This is the total protein that they consumed. Well, based on all organizations, the American College of Sports Medicine, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, they all recommend somewhere between 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of mass. This person had 2.57 grams of protein per kilogram of mass. So well above the upper limit of the recommended protein that they were consuming. But look at when they were consuming it. At the end of the day, they had 95 grams of protein, this big dinner. At the same time that they were in a big energy balance deficit. Guess what? All of this protein is being used to satisfy the energy requirement. None of it is being used anabolically, right? So if you subtract this 95 grams of protein, because it's not really protein anymore, right? This person had a protein deficiency, right? You subtract that 95 grams, they had less than 5, grams per kilogram, 5 times half a gram per kilogram, which is a deficiency of protein intake, not because they didn't eat enough, but because of the way they were eating it and their energy balance state at the time that they were consuming it. This is a study by Padden Jones, lovely study, where people were consuming enough protein. They had enough, but they couldn't keep their muscle mass and their bone density up. I mean, they wanted to prevent sarcopenia. They couldn't figure out what was going on. And they tried something very interesting. They took exactly the same amount of protein, but redistributed it over the course of a day, right? So same amount of protein. Guess what? Everything got better, right? Because you're providing the protein in a way that the body can use it, and they're in a better energy balance state. So good thing. So just consider this. Protein should be consumed in relatively small amounts throughout the day, 20 to 30 grams per meal, something like that, okay? By the way, this study here, this Benardot Nutritional Concerns for the Artistic Athlete, is something you might want to look at, because almost everything that I'm talking about here today is specific to the artistic athlete, and it's included in this study. But increased protein and meal frequency are associated with significant decreases in total body fat and abdominal fat. Cool. And the ingestion of more than 30 grams of protein in a single meal does not enhance muscle protein synthesis. And if it's high leucine, you may actually get exactly the opposite effect. I actually had this published. It's a model I've suggested for looking at energy balance slightly differently. And basically what we found is it's good to spend the whole day in a relatively good energy balance state. In other words, you can't go too low and then try to catch up to it. To lose fat, it's good to spend 1 or 2 hours more in a catabolic state than in an anabolic state. So 1 or 2 hours more down here than up here. And if you want to gain muscle, it's best to spend 1 or 2 more hours up here then down here, coupled with physical activity so that you can put stress on the muscle so that there's a reason for the musculature to increase. What foods are consumed to achieve the desired goal also is critically important. So just, I want to end on this point, and it's very important that we take sequential measures on individuals. I want you to imagine that somebody shows up with a body fat level that's higher than the average for their group. Our tendency is to say your body fat level is too high, right? But what if a month earlier, their body fat level was even higher? And a month before that, it was even higher. So they're moving in the right direction. Why in the world would we intervene in someone who's already doing something correctly, right? To get to where they want to be. And we wouldn't know that unless we had sequential measures on someone, right? We can look at it the other way too. What if somebody has a really good body fat? They're below the average, for their group, right? Month before that, they're even lower. Month before that, they were even lower. We tend to not intervene, right? But they're moving in the wrong direction. Maybe we should kind of ask some questions. Why is this happening? What are you doing? What's happened? That your body fat level is gradually going higher. So analyzing trends ends up being extremely important. And I would have to say that what you say and how you say it impacts food restriction. So, example, a person who's told that their body fat percent is too high, conversation's finished. It doesn't matter what you say from that point on, they're going to put themselves on a diet, right? Finished, right? What if you took that same person and you took the inverse of that and you said, listen, I'd love to figure out how to get your lean mass a little bit higher. You want to work with me on that? Increase your muscle mass. So percent lean mass is the inverse of percent body fat, right? So if somebody is 30% fat, they're 70% lean, right? In general terms, right? You get an entirely different outcome when, depending on the words that you use with that individual. Thank you. I appreciate your attention. I'm happy to take questions if you have any.
That was great, Dan. Thank you. If anyone has a question, they can feel free to enter in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask. Otherwise, I do have a question, but I don't know if anyone else wants to share anything.
I'm actually very friendly and very nice, so you don't have to worry.
You are. Well, I'll get it started then. So, right, with the performing artists, I think the biggest barrier is schedules, right? And getting them to eat at more often throughout their day. So I guess what are some like easy tips that we can give those types of athletes to say, like, I think they're starting to understand, especially from the dancer side, the musician side, it's slowly getting there. But like, if they have a schedule of like 3-hour class and they're going straight into rehearsal, of course I hear like, oh, I'm snacking on goldfish all day long. And I'm like, no, don't snack on goldfish all day long. Like, what are some easy things to like tell them to do, or how to work around like a schedule that they have no control over?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Part of the problem is the environment that they're in. So I'll give you an example with figure skaters. I recommended that figure skaters, pardon me, have a sports beverage very easily accessible by the ice rink. And the message that I got back was, sorry, it was not allowed. I said, what? And they said it wasn't allowed because, God forbid, if they were to spill a little bit of the sports beverage on the ice, it might discolor the ice a little bit, right? So they had those kinds of limitations. So I think we have to think about what the environment is like, okay? Secondly, if they're working together, right, the first thing that I would do is I would talk to the administrator for the environment where they're working together, wherever they have their rehearsals, and say, could we set up a snack bar, right? So that everybody does the right thing. Remember that study I mentioned about the bars and the liquid, right? And they all went back to what the group did. right? It's very difficult to take an individual within a group and have them do something differently than everybody else is doing in that group. But if all of a sudden everybody has a snack break at 10 o'clock in the morning and everybody has a snack break at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right? Then you resolve the issue. Plus, you can do some food planning, so it's not left up to the individual, with what kind of snacks. So you could have fruit and cheese and, whole grain crackers and gluten-free or whatever, you need there, because you're doing it for the whole group, and it's easier to handle that. That doesn't really answer the question, but you understand my concern.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you're
I think it is.
when you're dealing with an individual who's in a larger group, it's better to say, how can we do this for the whole group? Because if it's right for that individual, chances are it's right for everybody within that group, right? I mean, one of my students was the principal ballerina for the Atlanta Ballet, and she's now a registered dietitian. And so that's the first thing that she does when she works with different ballet schools, is she tries to show them how they can do better if the school itself had a food bar, a drink bar, where everybody could have access to it.
Yeah. I think it's the access being key. Like, I'm thinking in our Peabody Conservatory setting where the cafeteria is only open on certain times and the dancers get out after when the cafeteria is closed. So then they have like nowhere to go. So then they have to learn how to meal prep and like food plan. And I think they get very overwhelmed with it. And the ones that I see in the clinic for rehab are really struggling. And
right. So it's easier. A good example would be there are corporations now which stop work at 10 o'clock in the morning. Right. And they give everybody a 20-minute period during that 10 o'clock period and they have food carts. They've got all kinds of stuff on every floor where people can stop, talk, get a little snack, have a little cup of coffee and tea, and do something. And one of the things that they found is that it improves productivity and it lowers their health insurance costs, because people don't get sick as much, right?
Yeah.
So that becomes self-motivational. That is, when you start getting that kind of return on your investment, it becomes worth it. I'm trying to get my workplaces, to institute no classes from 10 to 10:30, right? So that everybody, teachers, students, everybody can just take no classes from 3 to 3:30. Just have a little something so that you can get people normalized, get blood sugar okay, and everybody gets friendlier and nicer, and it becomes a much more pleasant environment. I was at the Sydney Olympic Games. I was on the sports medicine committee for the international governing body for gymnastics. And I remember this so vividly. There are these sports medicine people from all over the world at the opening session. And the head of the International Olympic Committee came on stage to welcome us all. And in the middle of his welcoming talk, the school bell went off. It was a very loud, irritating school bell. And I thought, oh my goodness, how embarrassed those Australians must be that happened in the middle of Samaranch's speech, right? I mean, I thought, oh wow, how embarrassing. And sure enough, the person from Australia jumped out of his seat and he ran to the microphone, and we all thought he was going to apologize for that interruption. No, what he said was, it's time for our morning snack break. We'll come back. So we went out, they had snacks for everybody, and it was structured. And it was wonderful. I've never been to a more friendly meeting. Nobody got hangry. It was really quite good. So.
Yes. I think in the chat, Terry had a question on which energy bars do you tend to recommend?
Oh, I don't. But because it really depends on the situation that a person has. I kind of like limited ingredient energy bars so that you know exactly what's in there. So an example, there's a Rise bar, which has whey protein and some honey and a little carbohydrate in it. 3 ingredients, I think. And so it basically, I like to be able to read the label. So depending on what you're looking for, you can get it, right? But I don't, there's another reason why I don't like saying what I like, because I don't want to put people on a monotonous intake. If you had a rise bar yesterday, have a different bar tomorrow, right? Try different things, right? And just understand that all you're trying to do between meals, have a little bit of protein, a little bit of carbohydrate to normalize blood sugar, and make sure you have some liquids. What a lot of people do now is mid-morning. I mean, this happens to me now. Mid-morning, I'm sitting in my office at work. I'll get a knock on my door. A colleague will come and say, Dan, let's go have coffee, right? So when I have coffee, I always eat something with it, right? But my colleagues don't. And what happens is the caffeine fakes the brain, because it's a central nervous system stimulant, into thinking that blood sugar is normal. It's not. So by the time you get to lunch, if you didn't have something to normalize blood sugar, you're going to be hyperinsulinemic, ghrelin won't be shut off, you'll eat more than you should, you'll be a little bit out of control in terms of what you're willing to eat, right? Bad things happen, right? So remember, having a stimulant to make you feel better is not what you're looking for. You're looking for some way to keep blood sugar steady over the course of the day, right? And I said you've got 3 hours. That's if you're doing what I'm doing right now, sitting on my backside, not very physically active, right? If you're physically active and you're burning calories at a faster rate, depending on the intensity of what you're doing, you may only have an hour, right? And that's one of the reasons why you want to learn how to sip on a sports beverage. Sip, right? Just to keep yourself normal. Not to allow yourself to get abnormal and then try to recover from it, but to sip on a beverage so that you can keep yourself normal.
Well, thank you so much for taking your time on this early Tuesday morning to share all of this information with us. It was, I think, invaluable for everyone that was on this call. Dennis, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't think so at this point. If anybody has questions about CME credit, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. We can help you get that if you aren't getting it. And otherwise, we will see you all next month. And we're going to have a talk on the use of ultrasound in sports medicine by Dr. Iman, one of our sports physicians.
And that will be on October 11th at the same time, 6:45 a.m. So be on the lookout for the Zoom link if you're interested in following us over the course of the months to come. And thank you all for being here and learning something. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you, Dan, so much.
My pleasure. Great to be with you this morning.
Yeah,
Thanks,
really
Dan.
appreciate it.
Thank you, Dennis.
Wonderful information.
Thank you. So I'm going to stay on for a second while everybody else gets off.
Sure.
Was that pretty much what you were hoping for?
That was perfect.
Yeah, it was amazing. I just had